this week, and Pasquale will be back next Sunday, but we're so grateful for him and his friendship and fellowship with us. We're so glad you got here on Time Change Sunday, and glad your phone reminded you that your day started a little earlier. Last week we began a new series that we'll go through the month of March that will culminate on Easter Sunday, which is the 31st of March. And we are looking at the lives of people whose faces were around the cross, people whose lives prominently featured in the story of the last 24 hours of Jesus. We began last week looking at the story of Judas Iscariot, and we talked about the face of remorse and regret. And this morning we're going to look at a second face. It's the face of Pontius Pilate, the face of people pleasing. I want to talk to you this morning about something that on the surface looks like really a good thing, not a bad thing. We all like to please others, some of us more than others do. We like to have people's approval. We like to have people's affirmation. We like to have people's support. But there's another level where we lose integrity. There's another level when we begin to operate not out of truth, but out of what is untrue. And of all the people in the Bible who is an example that when you take this to an extreme of what it does to your character and what it does to your integrity and what it does to your countenance and what it does to your view of the world, it's the man called Pontius Pilate who had the final say about what would happen with Jesus Christ. I want to pick the story up in the book of John in the 18th chapter. And the story of Pilate is told both in chapter 18 and chapter 19. And I'm going to unpack a little bit of it right now in chapter 18, and then we're going to pick up a little bit later in the rest of it. Really, today's message is pretty much going to come straight out of what John wrote. And I just want to make some comments on that. And, you know, every time we come together, we have two challenges. One, to be authentic, and second, to be relevant. So we're going to be authentic about this struggle we have to want to please people. And then we're going to make it relevant. I want to show you how to take from Pilate's life application for you and for me about this struggle of wanting to please people and to do the right things. Now, the setting here that John gives us is on that Friday morning. Jesus on Thursday night has been betrayed by Judas. He has been all night in a religious kind of trial because it was the Jewish religious leaders that Rome had allowed to have jurisdiction over the people. So Jesus is being charged not against a civil law, but he's being charged against this religious law, much like you might see today in a Muslim country that is, strictly trying to interpret law based on the Quran. And so Jesus is under this really illegal trial. I mean, there's no counsel, there's no preparation, there's no opportunity for evidence. It's happening in the middle of the night. Now, it's the next morning, and the Jews, though, still have to have the approval of Rome to do what they want to do with Jesus. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 18, verse 28, and here's what John writes. Remember, John was an eyewitness. He's the only one of the disciples that doesn't run away. He is there through everything that happens, beginning on that Thursday night, through this illegal trial process, through what Pilate does, through the scourging, all the way to the cross, and is there when Jesus is almost to his dying breath, and Jesus says to him, John, take care of my mother. And mother, this is now your son, John. So he sees everything. He's the eyewitness. And here's what he says happens. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas, who was the Jewish high priest, the guy who was in charge of that court, to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate comes out to them. Now that tells you something about Pilate. He's a Roman governor, And instead of making them come see him, he comes out to them. And nobody's happy to see anybody. Neither one of these guys like each other. They all resent each other. But he comes to them. And Pilate comes out and he goes, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" And they say to him in a very disrespectful way, "Now listen, if he were not a criminal, we wouldn't hand him over to you. I mean, how stupid do you think we are? Do you think we'd just bring an innocent man?" Well, Pilate says, "Well, then you take him yourselves. You judge him. Do it by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone." Now, here's the interesting thing about Rome. Rome made a lot of acquiescence to these Jewish religious leaders. They pretty much let them do whatever they wanted to do, as long as Rome was able to collect taxes. That's really what Rome wanted from them. They wanted their taxes. And they didn't want a whole lot of rabble-rousers, a lot of troubles, didn't want an insurrection. That's why the Roman army was there. But they didn't allow execution. You couldn't have capital punishment legislated or enforced. Rome had to give permission, and that was the role of the governor. And the governor appointed by Tiberius was Pontius Pilate. He's the 5th governor. Since Rome had taken over that part of the world, he was the 5th governor that had ruled over Judea, also called Israel. We have no right to execute anyone, they objected. And then John says parenthetically, this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate goes back in the palace, he summons Jesus, and he goes, "Let me ask you something. Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus doesn't really give him a straight answer. He says, "Well, let me ask you this. Is this your idea? Do you think I'm king of the Jews? Or did others talk to you about me?" Wasn't really the answer Pilate's looking for. Pilate goes, "Wait, am I a Jew? I don't get what you people do. Your own people, the chief priest, they've handed me over to you. What is it that you've done?" And Jesus says, "You know, my kingdom's not of this world." Now what he's really saying is, no, I don't have anything to do with what you do. I'm no threat to you. I'm no threat to them. The kingdom that I have, it's not a kingdom here on earth. I'm not trying to supplant anybody. I'm not trying to take over anybody's job. I'm not trying to run anything. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by these Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. Now, you and I know what he's talking about. He's talking about this spiritual world that we've come to be a part of when we receive Christ into our lives. But he's talking to a guy that doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. I mean, Jesus might have well been talking in pig Latin. And Pilate would have understood just as much as he understands this. "Ah," he says, "so you are a king then." He's looking for something to hang on to here. And again, Jesus doesn't give a yes or no answer. Jesus says, "You say that I'm a king." And you know, in fact, the reason I was born and that I came into this world is to testify to that very truth. Yes, I am king. And then this is the most powerful sentence that Jesus says. I imagine him looking Pilate right in the eye and say, "You know, Pilate, everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Now that's a powerful statement. And if you leave aside what we're talking about today, I mean, that has a tremendous power for our lives. Where do you get truth from? Where do you get the sense of what you ought to do and what you should not do? Who do you listen to? Whose voice is in your ear? Who gets inside your head? Who's inside your heart? Jesus says, "Let me tell you something. Everybody on the side of truth, Pilate, listens to me." Because why? Because Pilate's got to make a decision. And whose voice are you going to listen to, Pilate? Then Pilate gives as powerful as an answer, though it was probably meant with a lot of ridicule. He asked them a question that has hung through the ages since he asked it. What is truth? But he probably said it with a laugh. Probably said it with a sneer. What is truth? And with that, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and says, look, I find no basis for a charge against this man. Now, Pilate's already gone on record. There's no reason for Jesus to be facing what he's facing. But instead of letting that be his final answer, he tries to come up with this compromise. But I've got an idea, he says. It's your custom, not mine, it's your custom that I release to you one prisoner every year at Passover. So why don't you let me release this so-called King of the Jews? They shout back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. That is an understatement. Barabbas was the worst kind of criminal. According to other historians who were alive at that time, who write outside the Bible, this was not a good man. This is probably the worst guy in the prison. And that's why, clearly, Pilate selected him. He's a guy so bad, so rotten, nobody would ever want that guy on the streets again. And the plan backfires. You keep Jesus. You give us Barabbas. People pleasing gets you in a lot of trouble. There's this legend that when God was creating the world, the angels were watching him make all the animals. God saw the angels were really intrigued. He goes, hey, why don't you guys, you want to make an animal? Why don't you make me a horse? And so the legend goes, the angels took opinions and advice of what it ought to look like from everybody. And because angels are so nice, they didn't want anybody left out. They didn't want anybody to think they had a bad idea. So God took every suggestion and came together, and it looked like this. You've heard about a camel before, right? It's a horse created by a committee. The problem with trying to please everybody is it's simply impossible. Maybe the greatest sage that we've ever had on the American scene is Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln said, you can please some of the people all the time. You can please all the people some of the time, but you cannot please all the people all the time. Has anybody found that out to be true? Yeah. I really struggled during my college and early adult years wanting to please people. I mean, I'm not proud of it. I can even remember when in college, it was really important to me that the guys that I hung out with liked the girls that I took out. I don't know why I cared today. I mean, it's not like there were millions of girls that wanted to go out with me anyway. But I would not really go out with a girl if I didn't think that she was somebody all my friends would approve of. It's a silly way to live your life. But I struggled with that in my early years. Two things changed me from being a people pleaser. One is I got married and I found out it's impossible to please your wife all the time. But more, it's impossible to please your mother-in-law. Now, Kathy's mother and I have had this ongoing thing for 30 plus years. She tolerates me at best, probably, and I kind of the same way with her, to be honest. Really, she's a mother in love, just not all the time. One year at Christmas, she gave me 2 ties. And so when we had dinner that night, I put one of the ties on, and I went to the table, and she looked at me, and she goes, oh, you didn't like the other tie. Then I became to be a pastor, and that's the second thing that taught me, you're never going to please the people all the time. And some people, you never please them. They're just always, for whatever reason, going to be unhappy. I was in this little country church in the early days, and I moved to another church, and some of the guys from the church came and moved my stuff. And when I got there, one of the guys said, "You notice I didn't help you move, but I'll be the first guy to help you pack." That's a joke. But that's the way some people are in churches. I heard about a church that it was a tough place to be a pastor. First of all, out on the church sign, they wrote the name of the pastor not with ink, but they wrote it in chalk. And the chalk was on a string that swung out there in the wind. And the head deacon threw the eraser up and down the whole time you preached. Doesn't take long in life to realize there's not a lot to be gained by just trying to make people happy. But some of us get stuck with being people pleasers. And we can't ever get on in our life like we ought to. We can't ever really be definitive people. We can't ever really be people of character and people that are known for what they stand for, because we're worried, what will people think? We're worried, well, what would that mean for my career? We're worried about how it be received. We're worried if we'll be understood. We worry if we'll be liked. The story today about people pleasing is more impactful than you think, because it's not just about how you live your life emotionally, and it's not just about how you live your life relationally, but it has a great bearing on how you live your life spiritually. People-pleasing has enormous, look at this, say it with me, has enormous spiritual consequences. If every decision you make that's really an important decision is filtered through what would other people think if I do what God wants me to do, it will end up making you deaf to the voice of God. It will make you blind to the guidance of God. And it will make you powerless to have the strength to obey God. And of all the people in the Bible, as I said, that is given to us as an example and a warning of excessive and obsessive need to please people, it's Pontius Pilate. Now here's the thing about Pilate. He was a pitiful politician. He was pitted in a popularity power contest. He struggled with popularity, pessimism, and powerlessness. That, my friends, is alliteration. You're not going to get that at Saddleback. That's Class A alliteration. He was. He was a consummate politician. It wasn't easy being a governor in that part of the world. No one would say that it wasn't. But in a key critical moment when he knew what truth was, he fails the test because he needed to please these people to hang on to his job. I want to talk to you the relevancy of this message as how being a people pleaser will cause you problems in life. I'm going to show you from Pilate's life what it does to you. The first thing you'll see is it ultimately breeds contempt. You see, when we try to please people in our decision making, when we try to do not what we think we should do or what God knows we ought to do, and we compromise ourselves, we do it thinking people will like us, we do it thinking people will give us favor, we do it thinking that people will give us access, but in truth, the ultimate impact of being that kind of person is that people will not respect you. They will have contempt for you. Now, it may give us temporary popularity, but the end result is always contempt. Now, look at Pilate's life. Pilate's despised in Israel prior to what happens here for at least 3 reasons. Now, you got to understand about Pilate. Pilate was born a slave. But he married well. He married into the family of Tiberius. And because of patronage, Tiberius began to move him up in the ranks of the Roman administrative world. And ultimately he got this plum job to be the governor But it wasn't quite so plumb, because these were the hardest people in the world to please. You got to remember, nobody wanted Rome and Israel. They're there not because they got invited. They're there because they won a war. And they are in that country taxing the dog out of the Jewish people, enforcing their rules and their ways, violating all the time what these people believe the Old Testament said, how the world ought to look and how it ought to live. And he's there trying to keep this uneasy peace, and he's there trying to take their taxes. And over the time that he is there, he's there about 12 years, they came to hate him for at least 3 reasons. First of all, they hated him because he was the first governor to put on the army's uniform, the insignia of the Emperor Tiberius. Now, to the Jews, that was a huge offense, because the first of the 10 Commandments is, you shall have no other gods before me. And the Romans believed that their emperor was indeed the God of the world. So every day they see these Roman soldiers, and no other governor had done that. They had shown deference. They had shown discretion, but not Pilate. Pilate puts it in their face. They hate him for it. Second thing, he had put graven images of Rome all through his palace. You went in the palace, you saw these graven images. Well, the 10 Commandments says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no graven images. He was directly violating another commandment. But what really, really had made them so hateful and angry is that he had taken temple tax money and used it to pay for an aqueduct that brought water into Jerusalem. Now, this temple tax money was as we said last week, was a real scheme the Jews came up with. It was a way to line their own pockets. It wasn't good. It wasn't right. It's why Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple. But it was their money. And he took it and used it for something out of the Roman world. And they hated him. And you go back and see what we said a moment ago. That day when they come to him with Jesus, they despise him so much, they won't even go in the palace. It's Passover, and the way they interpret the Old Testament, to go into a place of a man who wasn't of the Jewish faith made them unceremonially unclean. They don't even have enough respect for Pilate to go into the palace. They make the governor come out on the sidewalk and talk to them there. You know what they're really telling him? We want you to do our dirty work for us. We want you to condemn Jesus to death. We want you to get this man dead. We want you to put him on the cross. But we have so little respect for you, we won't come into your house. We're not going to show you the least bit of respect, and we'll never forgive you for how we think you've insulted us. You see, when we try to compromise our principles to make people like us, we mistakenly think that they're going to change their opinions about us because of our acquiescence. The truth of the matter is, they don't respect us more, they respect us less. Because you know what they found out? They now know our integrity is for sale. I gave this illustration 3 or 4 months ago, but I want to bring it up again. John Grisham wrote a great book called Rainmaker, and then Francis Ford Coppola made it into a movie in 1997. Starred Matt Damon and Danny DeVito. Matt Damon fresh out of law school, and he gets this case against an insurance company, and the lawyer there is John Boyd. And John Boyd has been in the system forever. He doesn't even have any conscience left over. It's just all about whatever he has to do to get money, money, money. And he's in a case and he's on the wrong side of it, but he doesn't even have a conscience anymore about it. And in a deposition in Cleveland, when Matt Damon, who has no money, just out of law school, rides a bus all night to depose people from the insurance company, they had rigged the whole thing and nobody is there for the deposition. And Matt Damon looks in the eyes of John Boyd and says, "Do you even remember when you first sold out?" It's a great line. And it's a great example of what happens when we begin to sell out the truth for whatever reason to get people to like us. Be careful with thinking that if I'll do something, become something, be something that I'm really not, that God doesn't really want me to be, that people will like me more. Pilate's example suggests otherwise. It doesn't bring us favor, it brings contempt. Second of all, it has this unusual power over us to change our way of viewing life. You would think if you did this and got people to like you more, it would make you happier, but it doesn't. Truth of the matter is, it doesn't make you optimistic. It turns you into perpetual pessimist. That's all that putting your integrity for sale can lead you to. It takes away the joy and the vigor of life. You know what pessimism is, right? Pessimism is this belief that anything that can go wrong and doesn't go wrong is just waiting for a much worse time to go wrong. You know people that are pessimists? I heard about a guy that had a friend. This guy was the worst pessimist of all. These guys like to go bird hunting back in Mississippi. And this guy got an incredible bird dog. This bird dog was so amazing that when he went to get the birds, he didn't swim in the water. He could walk on the water. And he thought, finally, I'll impress my friend, who's always pessimistic. And so they hunt all day. He doesn't tell him what this dog can do. And all day long, this dog goes out in the water and brings the birds back and walks on the water all day long. At the end of the day, he goes, you know, you hadn't said anything about my dog. What do you think about it? He goes, well, I'm not too impressed. You bought a dog, can't even swim. And that's pessimism. And look at Pilate's life here. Here's Jesus, his life hanging on the balance. They have this facade of a civil trial going on. And on the outside, they seem to be speaking very deferentially as these Jewish religious leaders to Pilate. But the truth of the matter is, they knew it was just a matter of time till Pilate was going to give them what they wanted. The Jewish leaders knew it, and guess what? Pontius Pilate knew it as well. That in the end, because he had long ago sold out his integrity, that he would compromise. You know how we know pessimism had overtaken Pilate? Look at this conversation. He goes, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus says, that's your own idea? People talking to you about me? Am I a Jew? How do I know? Your own people, your own chief priests handing you over to me? And Jesus says, it's my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight for me. My kingdom's in another place. Ah, so you are a king then, says Pilate. Jesus says, you said it yourself. That's the reason I was born. I came into the world. Everybody on the side of truth listens to me. And there it is. In the original language, Pilate says it like this. Ah, what is the truth? What is the truth? The truth was obvious. This was an innocent man. The truth was obvious. These were people that were using Pilate to get what they wanted. It's obvious that Pilate had no room to get any favors. It's obvious that they could go to Tiberias. They had at least 3 things they could put up against him. They could get him run out of Judea. They could get him run out of ever having a government job again. That was the truth. Everybody knew the truth. But Pilate, long ago, had compromised his character, compromised his integrity, compromised what was right or wrong. And while everybody else knows what truth is, Pilate doesn't even know if truth exists. See, that's what pessimism will do with you. That's what turning into a cynic will do to you. You don't even know what truth is. You don't even care what truth is. Truth, truthfully, is whatever anybody wants it to be. That's one of the negative implications of this postmodern world we live in. Truth is relative. Come and be a people pleaser. You do that long enough, it'll turn you to a pessimist. It'll turn you into a cynic. You see, it's got negative implications for our life. It breeds contempt. It gives you a pessimistic view of life. There's no point trying to stand for anything. It's all a matter of give and take. To get what you want, you got to give it to others. And most deadening about it is it eventually leads to what I would call perpetual powerlessness. If there's ever a question about the emasculating impact of being a people pleaser, the final dialogue between Jesus and Pilate proved it for all time. You get into chapter 19. Pilate's on the horns of a dilemma. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw Jesus be brought out by Pilate, they began to yell, "Crucify! Crucify! Crucify!" Mob chants. Pilate says, "You take him, you crucify him. I don't find any charge, any basis for a charge against him." Second time he has declared publicly, "I know this is an innocent man." Jewish leaders shout back, "We have a law. According to that law, he has to die. He claimed to be the Son of God." Now it's a religious rule he's broken, not civil. They're accusing him of blaspheming, saying, "I'm the Son of God." Now look at this. When Pilate hears this, he's even more afraid. He goes back into the palace, and he gets right in the face of Jesus. He goes, "Where do you come from?" And Jesus just looks at him. No answer. "Why do you refuse to speak to me?" says Pilate. Look at this. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus says, "You don't really have any power at all." And he's really talking on two levels. Spiritually, you wouldn't have any power if it hadn't been given to you by the will of God from above. But you know what he's also talking experientially, practically, observantly? I've watched you all day, Pilate. You don't have any power. The only thing worse than what you're about to do is the people who've manipulated you to do what you're going to do. Now, I want you to think of the amazing absurdity of this next sentence. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. Tried to set Jesus free. He is the Roman governor. He can do anything he wants to do. He has ultimate power. But the more he struggled with this decision, the more the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar." Ding dong. There's your meal ticket. There's your job security. All we've got to do is tell them. And in fact, they didn't have to go tell Caesar. All they had to do was threaten to go tell Tiberius. They weren't going to go to Rome. They weren't going to go to that much trouble. They just know if they threaten it, that this is a powerless man. When Pilate heard this, when he heard what? The threats. He brought Jesus out and set him down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of the preparation of Passover. It was about noon. And Pilate goes, "Here is your king." And they shout, "Take him away, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. Cleverly they answer, "Well, we have no king but Caesar." There it is again. A little subtle reminder who your boss is. Verse 16, finally Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Now you ponder that for a moment. Consider this, the only man with the authority to stop the crucifixion of Jesus Christ had long ago abdicated his power to act with any integrity because he wanted, because he needed the pleasure of other people to remain in his position. See, he had turned into not a ruler, he had turned into a slave. A slave that they would continue to allow him to be the governor rather than tell Tiberius. It's a moment of irony in Scripture that the most powerful man in Jerusalem was in fact the weakest link when the fate of Jesus Christ fell into his hands. There's two little interesting things that happen after this I want to point out. And they have a lot of impact on this story. Mel Gibson really captured it well in The Passion of the Christ. Pilate orders quickly a sign to be made that's written in 3 languages. In Greek, and Aramaic, and Latin. And he orders that it be nailed to the cross above the head of Jesus. And on the sign, what he wrote was, "Here is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Pilate knows he's innocent. Pilate knows this verdict should never be handed down. And Pilate deep down knows this man is indeed a king. Pilate takes a stand for integrity, but when he does it, it no longer mattered. Anybody can write anything on a sign after the fact, but the ship of integrity had already sailed. Pilate learns a hard lesson about life that day, that we would be very wise to go to school on. Number one, being a people pleaser doesn't earn respect, it earns contempt. Number two, it won't bring happiness, it only brings pessimism. And it doesn't produce power. In fact, it destroys it. The second really interesting thing happens right before Pilate finally gives in and says, okay, crucify him. He's interrupted in his court. They bring a message to him. It's a message from his wife. And so he stops and he hears the message. You know what his wife tells him? I don't know what's going on down there at the palace, but I have had these disturbing dreams about this man named Jesus, and whatever you do, Pontius, do not get involved in this situation. Don't you do what these religious leaders are trying to force you to do. Do not have this blood on your hands, Pilate. Now that's important. And I'll tell you why it's important. Because sometimes we think we don't have a choice. Sometimes we think we don't have an option. Sometimes we think the cost is just too high to do the right thing. Paul writes about those very times in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, 13, The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. You see, at that moment, we felt like nobody's ever faced the kind of things I'm facing. I don't know anybody could stand up to what I'm trying to stand up. Paul says that's not true. You're not the first person, you're not the last person that'll be facing what you're facing. And he says, secondly, God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. Sometimes we think, this is just too much, too hard, too difficult. I just have to give in. No. If it was too much for you, Paul says, God wouldn't allow it to fall on you. You see, all of our trials and all of our testings, they are custom built for us. Now, you might not be able to handle what I have to face, and I might not be able to handle what you have to face, but I can handle what I have to face, and I promise you can handle what you have to face. You can do the right thing. God is faithful. He won't allow you to be challenged or tested or in a trial greater than the ability to do the right thing. And look at this. And when you're tempted, He'll show you a way out so that you can endure it. And at the very last moment, God sends Pilate, his wife. He says, Pontius, don't do what these people are trying to force you to do. And if you'll wait a minute, if you'll put everything on pause, if you'll take a deep breath, and if you'll wait, God will honor what He says here. He'll show you a way out before you make a horrible decision like the one Pilate made. And it really leaves us, this story does, with a choice. Who will we most resemble in this coming week? Will it be Pilate, who says, who really knows what truth is? You know, truth is relative. Right and wrong is relative. There's no morality. There's just compromise. There's just giving in. It's just give and take. It doesn't really matter. Really? Is that where we're headed as a culture? Is that where we are as a society? What a pessimistic, what a cynical view of life, but that's what it always leads to. Or as men and women of God, we can say, we'll stand with Jesus Christ. Say it with me. Who said what? The truth shall set you free. Hard to beat the truth. Hard to beat the truth. We can live a life of compromise, or we can live a life of principle, a life of integrity, a life rooted in believing in God enough to do the right thing, even if it's an unpopular thing to do. Let's bow our heads and pray together. Father, this is such a long ago story, but it's so relevant. It's so accurate. It's so needed to be heard. It's so applicable to our lives. God, we stand before you this morning and we confess that on more than once in our lives, we've been more concerned that other people approve of us than we have that you approve of us. We have compromised ourselves. We have become to be somebody we were never intended to be. We have lived a life not based on truth, but on compromise. We have ended up not being optimistic, but pessimistic about the world and about life. And you remind us again today, both of the consequences that can lead, but also to the choice that we have. We thank you for the promise of 1 Corinthians 10:13 to know that we're not the first person to face this challenge. It is not too much for us to overcome. and you have a plan of escape that you will provide just as you did to Pontius Pilate through his wife. God, wherever people are this morning, whatever situations they are in, whatever decisions they're facing, may they find strength. May they find power in the truth. And may they plant their feet solidly there. And there may they stand.